With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. All right, welcome friends and allies to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and we're on the road, man.
Yeah.
We are mobile. We're on the road.
The Huntersville, North Carolina branch.
Yeah.
Zoweh.
And this is in the pilot, Captain Jeff Andretian.
You're on the flight deck.
On the flight deck.
Up in the tower.
That's right.
Whatever you want to say.
That's right. But we're at his house because we're on the road. Greg Sailors and S.J. Jennings, myself, and with our friend and teammate, really, Jeff Andretian. Jeff is on some earlier podcasts. If you dial back to Adventure, we did a podcast series on Adventure, and Jeff was our guest on that. Welcome back, Jeff.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to be with you, man, and looking across these microphones and headsets and stuff at your handsomeness. So welcome. Jeff is sporting a new knife. We have to talk about that.
Well, Greg's here, and when Greg comes to visit, you have to have the best
pocket knife.
Well, you have to have a worthy knife.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
You never know when you're going to need it, but if you need it, you got to have it.
Appropriate knife to your station in life.
Yeah, I think so.
So that one looks like you could shave with it. It's pretty serious.
Yeah, it's not quite Crocodile Dundee, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Put that down.
It is sharp, I found out.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no. All right, so we're armed for the Exploring More podcast, and we've been in this series, SJ, about the 4 pillars.
Yeah.
Shout outs again to Christopher Matthews, our web engineer, who's awesome, MacGyvering through the web, and you can pick what you want to download, what you want to sign up for. Lots of good things there, so well done, Christopher. But Christopher had been with us a little more than a year, and some of us have been at this for 15 years in our friendships and our discoveries of important kingdom things. So these pillars, we were talking just before we were getting everything set up, we were just talking about how much more true the pillars of Zoweh have become since we discovered them. Right. The first one that we talked about over the past several weeks was pillar number 1 is intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God. Had Tom Benner in to talk about that for 3 sessions.
3 weeks.
And the girls, I think, for the final session on intimacy, oneness, and connectedness. So that's a great series. That's the foundation. That's why it's pillar number 1. Honestly, it's the foundation of what we were made for. Intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God. It's what we see in John 17 when Jesus prays for us as he's beginning to make a huge transition for not only himself and his life, but for all of creation, taking on the cross and then resurrecting. And before that, praying for his friends. Just a couple chapters before that, he says, "I no longer call you servants, but I call you my friends."
Yeah, I love what he says in John 17 about intimacy that he enjoys with the Father, and he so wants that for us.
Yeah.
And that was a great opportunity to talk about that in the podcast.
Yeah. So we're going to step into pillar number 2. I'm going to hit them all real quick. So that's pillar number 1 we just were talking about. Pillar number 2, we call orientation, who you are, where you are, and the good that God's up to in your life. And that's what we mean by an oriented man or an oriented woman. We're going to devote the next several sessions to pillar number 2. Pillar number 3, and I'm going to let you give the sequence. You did that really well the first time we started talking about this, SJ. But pillar number 3 is nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear. Pillar number 4 is more love, more life, and more freedom. So these are really important to us, to the ministry, to our mission, strategy, and vision, and the sequence, why they play 1, 2, 3, 4.
These are not just pillars for Zoweh. These are pillars for our lives.
Yeah.
And we live this way and are trying more and more, not in a striving sort of way, but in a growth, a deepening, an exploration, and an examination of our lives. How can we grow deeper in these areas and live more and more this way? So the intimacy between you and God, and then through others, that's the core. That's the first one, because everything relies on that.
Yeah,
everything comes back to that. That's exactly right. And it is loving God and it is loving others that you're capable of doing because you have an intimacy with God. As a matter of a short period of review. Without intimacy, without knowing and being known, you're really not capable of love in the way that God describes it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to start with that one and keep going back to that well and keep going back to that well over and over again. So then that leads you to the orientation, which really is an exploration, who you are, where you are, and the good God's up to in your life. Initially, for me, I will speak for, the rest of you guys can kind of chime in on it, but for this orientation, it was not only learning the basics of that, sort of who am I? Well, I'm a beloved son made in the image of God, right? Where am I? I'm in the midst of a spiritual battle. The physical realm and the spiritual realm echo against each other. We've talked about that in the warfare series quite a bit, the last series before this one. And the good that God is up to in my life is just being awake to what God is doing in your heart. And sometimes that's very good things. And sometimes I'm actually finding more and more that he's doing the most work and the best things for you and your heart in the midst of adversity. It being in the crucible, being in the forge, and being hammered under that intense heat and pressure to become something that's glorious.
I like what C.S. Lewis said. Why are dark places holy places?
Mm-hmm. It's not what we would typically sign up for, but it's a part of this. Oswald Chambers calls it, he takes us down in the valley and hammers it out. And yet, some of this stuff binds, the false self, the lies, it gets a hold of us. I think part of the restoration of us is a hard work. I know I hear guys talk about being hit upside the head with a 2x4. I'm not really talking about that.
Yeah.
We're talking about
I don't love that either.
It doesn't sound very loving.
Well, that just sounds like assault.
Yeah,
exactly. Like a bar fight
but
or
it was
something.
loving.
I'm not.
Yeah.
No.
But to be engaged in the restoration of your heart, to see things redeemed that weren't good, that he somehow is going to make good on them, I think it's going to take some kind of fire and adversity and challenges to bring them up, usually. I'm sure that one of the challenges I have is I would like for life to be a cruise ship, not a battleship. I'd like for things to be more comfortable than challenging, convenient versus inconvenient. But we're all confessing, those aren't really the places that I find him forging this life. And it wasn't Jesus's
life. The
life.
depth and the growth don't come there.
Yeah, it wasn't Jesus's life, and I don't believe it's to be ours as we bear his image and as we learn to live oriented. Moving through those, I want to read a part of the website, and then, Jeff, I'm going to let you lead off as our guest, just your response to this idea of orientation. So this is what we wrote on the Zoweh website under About Us and the 4 pillars. And here's pillar number 2, who you are, where you are, and the good that God's up to in your life. The Christian life is a journey of the heart to becoming oriented to the kingdom way. An oriented person is one who holds fast to his or her identity as a son or daughter of God, Galatians 4:7, who understands the gravity of the spiritual battle between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of darkness in which we live, and who is aware that God is always up to something good in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. Not everything that happens to us is good. Not everything that happens to us is God's will. People sin every day, and sin isn't God's will. But where his will isn't being done, his way is or will be, Romans 8:28. And we know with great confidence that God, who is deeply concerned about us, causes all things to work together as a plan for good for those who love God, to those who are called according to his plan and purpose. That's the Amplified Version. Final sentence. The false self-flesh that dwells within every believer and the enemy that has long been at work forming this little antichrist is committed to keeping believers disoriented, unsure and uncertain of who they are, unclear on what is going on in us and around us, and making sure that we question whether God is good. If it isn't good yet, then God's not done yet. That's pillar number 2.
Yeah. We talked about the 2x4 metaphor that we don't really like all that much, but the one that comes to my mind that I do like is how a diamond is made.
Right, under pressure.
Pressure, heat, and time is what it takes to make a diamond.
And then to get that diamond out of there,
and then you got to dig for it.
Dig for it, and then the craftsman really goes to work.
I think,
that's right.
And I really like the word excavation a little bit better than dig.
Yeah,
because that really is indicative of what we do.
Jeff, what's going through your heart and mind as we dive into this idea of orientation in this pillar?
One of the best ways to teach is to start with what does orientation look like, and as opposed to what doesn't it look like, which I could talk about also. But so I'm with American Airlines, and when you walk onto a modern day flight deck, I meet the co-pilot. It's always, hey, how are you? Where are you from? And all the niceties. But eventually, one of the first things I'm going to ask them is I'm going to say, hey, have you spun them yet? And so we have 3 inertial reference units on these airliners, and this is where the money is because their ability to navigate down to a hair's breadth is unprecedented. And he has to turn them off, the co-pilot, and then turn them back on, and the aircraft needs to sit still for 10 minutes as it senses the Earth's rotation so it could reorient to true north. It's absolutely essential that that airplane knows exactly where it is before we push off the gate. So not only do we do the check, but then we double check it. And one of the things it's doing while it's sitting still for 10 minutes is it's getting rid of past errors that it's picked up from the leg before. So minor errors in airspeed and altitude and things like that. So there's this time alone with God, really.
Undisturbed.
Because when we talk about orientation, it's not a one-time scenario.
No.
Because you're not going to be in the same place 5 years from now that you are right now. So it's always a good idea to go back to true north to find out, okay, exactly where am I right now? We just saw a scene from the movie Born Identity, and an unoriented man is very dangerous, actually. Not only to himself, but to those people around him. So when I get in an airliner, I need to know exactly where I am. Because if we're going to start shooting approaches into mountainous terrain, I need to know exactly where I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what that requires. Like you said, stillness, solitude. Is it the case? I mean, the luggage handlers have to does the plane have to be absolutely undisturbed?
Right. So if it does move, we have to reset the clocks.
Start all over again.
Start all over again. It's happened quite a few times.
I bet that's why I've said in a few...
the airport lounge. You're just waiting.
Somebody bumped the plane.
Right. You're looking at it, you're going, the plane's right there. It looks fine to me.
It sounds like that quiet game to me, or when you're in the back seat with your brothers and you're young, the quiet game, or the quiet
stop
game. Touching me, don't touch me, and they just want to get so close that they can just irritate you. That's funny.
Yeah.
In this particular session, men, we want to explore really this idea of orientation. We're going to talk about who you are in another session, and then where you are, the geography, this middle earth in which we exist and live and breathe, and then the good that God's up to in your life. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I think orientation in and of itself, like you said, Jeff, it's a topic to explore more.
Right.
I mean, my friend Greg and I, we like to hunt. Yeah, go ahead.
Being able to triangulate your place when you're hunting. If you're in Colorado, for example, I love to hunt out there. And hunting in Colorado is much different than hunting in North Carolina, where you're sitting in a tree stand and you're waiting. Usually out there, you're
moving,
glassing, you're going from one aspen grove to the next, and you have to remember where you came in. And so you have to do something called benchmarking. It's like dropping a pin, on Google Maps. You know where you started.
Yeah, a waypoint.
A waypoint, right, exactly. And then you look to where you think you're going. You mark that straight in front of you. You know where the sun is. You might see something on the skyline, for example, that a certain type of mountain, or maybe there's a mountain where, they had a rock slide. It's something that is different.
Yeah.
Point of interest.
You point out. Yeah, point of interest. You navigate by using those things. You know a lot about that, Jeff, with going celestial. And some of you that have heard Jeff before on other podcasts might have heard him talk about navigating by the stars, and the way that would go down. So, I think about that in a hunting, obviously, perspective, but also in life, too. There's certain things in my life from an orientation standpoint that I have benchmarks. I have those waymarks in my life that if I lose my orientation, if I lose my way, it might be a person like one of y'all, or it might be some place that I experienced God in such a way that I need to remember and come back to that spot.
Yeah, it happens to all of us.
Yeah,
and so orientation, if I was going to put another spin on it, I would say this is the way of a learner. This is the way of a disciple. This is about how wisdom is learned through experience. Because it's not just the hunting and the mountain over there you want to get to.
No.
It's knowing how to get there. It's knowing how not to die between here and there. It's knowing how to handle the weapon that you're carrying, the clothes that you're wearing. Are you hydrated for that environment?
Right.
If you're out west, so orientation involves so many variables. And that's why it's so critical to the kingdom life and the kingdom way, discovering what's true and experiencing how true that is. I believe that when we step into this, I've always loved this word since we discovered it, orientation, being oriented. You brought up Jason Bourne a while ago. He has a big problem in not knowing who he is, but he's pretty oriented when it comes to when bad guys come around.
Right.
Danger.
And so he can be dangerous. And a man who's oriented, I think, can be dangerous for good. Just like you said, a disoriented man or an unoriented man tends to live in a very small story. Orientation seems to be something larger for a larger life. And I think that's why it's a pillar for us, why it's so critical.
Something that just occurred to me, Michael, as you were talking about Jason Bourne, we often say, listeners, you've heard us talk about this before, awareness does not equal healing. Just because you're aware of a wound or aware of an issue maybe that's gone on in your heart doesn't mean it's healed. You've got to go through that process. Well, awareness doesn't equate to orientation either. I was thinking about the scene where he's in the little diner, Bourne Identity. He's still very confused about what's going on and why he knows the things he knows.
Who has a safety deposit box full of money and 6 passports and a gun? Who has a bank account number in their hip?
He talks about, even as I come in here and we sat down, I know that the pickup truck in the parking lot is the most likely place to find a gun. Mm. And I'm checking the sight lines as I'm sitting down here in the booth with you, and they can tell that the guy over at the bar goes about 235 and knows how to handle himself. At this altitude, I can run flat out for half a mile before I start having problems breathing. So he's aware of all those things, but he has no context.
How can I know that and not know who I am?
But he has no context
of journey
of
where he's
why,
going.
of why he knows those things or how to utilize those skills. Why do I even know these things? And I think about men, women too, in the church, out of the church, whatever it is, that have been exposed to tenets of Christianity, and they're aware of these things, but there's no context for them when it comes to their daily life.
That's a person who stayed in the Holiday Inn and think they can step into brain surgery or,
Holiday Inn Express.
Yeah.
It can be. I was that guy, a person who steps into a church Sunday after Sunday, but can actually live pretty lost.
Yeah. I have this knowledge, but I'm not oriented.
Right.
Yeah.
The truth of it is, at certain times in our life, we all get disoriented. No matter how oriented you can be, you're going to experience a disorienting experience. What's the first thing you look for when you're disoriented? You're looking for an oriented man, somebody to make sense of what just happened to you.
Someone or something. Is anything familiar?
Yeah.
Is anything familiar? Is this guy good or not?
Yeah.
That's coming my way. Can I ask a question?
I think the best definition I ever heard of an elder is a man that you want with you when you're caught in your worst moment. When you're upside down and you're on the ground, you want somebody to come in that's been down this road before and that then can reorient you to the truth about who is God and who are you.
Yeah. Okay. So after the break, we're going to talk about the company that you keep and how that plays into orientation or disorientation. Where are you getting your information? And then secondly, we're going to tell some stories about when this pillar started to become true for us. So we'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast.
Ladies, what if you or the women in your life could live from a heart that is settled in love, convicted of its worth, and moved by purpose and true desire? What if you could live unafraid and unashamed, sure that you belong? Welcome to The Deepening Journey, a 6-session video resource and journal workbook designed to be experienced together with other women or even on your own. It was recorded at Zoweh's Deepening Weekend for Women, birthed out of friendship and conversations between our guide team. Learn to experience belovedness. Our hearts need rest, comfort, clarity. we need a chance to be still and hear from God. We invite you to explore with us how we were made to live in God's kingdom and to flourish. Learn what comes against that flourishing and experience the offer of healing, integration, and restoration. Visit thedeepeningjourney.com to launch your voyage into a new chapter in God's kingdom.
All right, welcome back to the Exploring More podcast with Michael Thompson, my friends, Greg Sailors, S.J. Jennings, and our special guest, Jeff Andresen. And Jeff, you made a comment about really the company that you keep, about an elder and having someone who's with you. Let's just bring that into this orientation conversation. We've said this many, many times from platform or the podium or even in circles. Disoriented men have disoriented conversations. They have disoriented Bible studies. They have disoriented views. And typically, I want to just say this, when we think about disorientation, we would say lost, confused. And one really significant way to detect that, if you're trying to evaluate, is this person living in a larger story or not? And if they aren't, they're typically then living in a smaller story. And you can tell a person living in a smaller story because they talk about themselves. They talk about what they think.
There's certain catchphrases, right? Here's what you should do.
And here's what you should do.
Yeah.
Well, have you ever thought about,
Right.
their advice givers?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't live with any question marks.
Right.
There's hardly even commas.
They found a way,
And they're going to tell you about it.
and they're going to go for it.
And you really can't tell them or share with them or invite them or talk with them. It's part of what I think disorientation looks like, the smaller story that's about them.
Right.
And it doesn't work in a kingdom life. It just doesn't.
Yeah, for our listeners too, I want to give an encouragement. As I said that, here's what you should do. I think probably every one of us around the table would say, yeah, I've been that guy. We're getting better, but we've been that guy at some point in our lives too. I mean,
living curiously, like we like to say. Asking questions.
Yeah. So as an encouragement, if that felt convicting, I hope it didn't feel condemning.
Condemning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to the elder.
Yes.
What's interesting is almost the best guys to look for are the ones where the heat is being applied to their life. When they are disoriented, something has happened, and they're really looking for answers. It seems like they're the guys that are ready to listen. And I love to come into a person whose life's falling apart because often God is beginning to work. That's actually
The beginning
of work, and it always looks like a descent at first for them. But I always love to come in with, hold on for just a minute here, because sometimes God has to rearrange a few things.
He's got to dismantle you.
He's got to dismantle a few things in order for you to go forward. And that's when guys are really starting to look, is when something happens and they just don't understand it. And when you do meet that elder, you're going to fall in love with them. And the reason is because they're going to make sense of your life. They're going to be the ones that come in and steady you and to go, okay, here's what's going on. Me and Greg were talking about the movie 1917. And there was this amazing scene where there was a crash landing of this German airplane. They rescue the pilot, and then the pilot actually stabs and kills
the German pilot.
what would be the protagonist in the movie. And here's his friend sitting over him, weeping, completely disoriented about what just happened. And in comes the British the general, an elder. He says, "Get up.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to change. You can't do anything about that. Okay, let's go. Let's get in the truck. Let's get moving." And then he points him in the direction of his mission. And then I love what he says to him at the end. He says, "Make sure that when you give that message to the other general, that there's other people around. There's witnesses around, because some guys are just into it for the fight."
Yeah.
And so the elder doesn't do it all. He just picks them up, gets them going, and points them in the right direction.
So a couple hours ago, I was talking with a gentleman. He's an elder. He's in his 70s. And we were talking about films back and forth. And he said his favorite film is Jeremiah Johnson, 1970 something, right? But here's this lowlander, former naval something. So Robert Redford, he's just getting away from the war.
It's not even land. He's used to being on the water.
Yeah. It's such an irony. He wants to go up into the high country of the West for solitude and to get away from civilization because of what it's become. And this is an incredible film. The elder finds him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And a mentorship begins, a learning, and he keeps Jeremiah Johnson alive that first winter. And it's almost comedy at times in a pretty dramatic film.
Are you sure that you can skin grizz? Just as fast as you can find them.
But I think you're right, Jeff. It's the importance of good counsel. I think there's a passage, 1 Corinthians 15. Paul talks about bad company corrupting good morals.
Right.
And then the advice that we get, I want advice from a man who's lost.
Yeah.
I want advice from a man who is still alive, surviving from some
Right.
hardship. I know our kids we've had hardship in our lives as parents. Our parents, we've had hardship in our lives as we've walked through hard things, with parents dying. And the wisdom that comes from pain is something that we want to revere.
Yeah.
As part of an orienting process. And we've said this before. I want to be real careful that this doesn't offend, but I'm really interested in the counsel of a 60-year-old,
Right.
a 70-year-old.
Yeah.
Not that a 35-year-old can't teach or preach. They can know the Bible.
But they need some life under their belt.
But
When I walk into the room, I'm looking for the older guy who's walking with a limp.
right.
Those are the approachable ones.
Right.
Those are the ones I want to ask some questions to.
Yeah. Young guys, continue to pursue the ministry, continue to preach and teach.
Don't hear what we're not
That's
saying.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. But I think that the older I get, the more I honor and revere and look for that.
Yeah.
I want that counsel of an oriented man who might know something more about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, there's a great quote that I think goes right along with this from Howard Macy. He says, "The spiritual life cannot be made suburban. It's always frontier, and we who live in it must accept and even rejoice that it remains untamed." And I love the idea
Yeah.
of that, the frontier portion, particularly with
Yeah.
what you were saying with that previous story. And, Jeff, you were that for a time for me, the frontier. He was a frontiersman for me.
Frontiersman, yeah.
I needed somebody, because I had
You were
lost,
Jeremiah Johnson.
I had
He was Bear
lost-
Claws.
Exactly. I had lost my purchase. I was in a good betrayal, going through a betrayal, not a good one, but it ended up being good for me. And if it weren't for you, Jeff, and then eventually Michael and some other men as well, I didn't have the next step. I couldn't see the next blaze on the trail, the next waypoint. And that, Jeff, was so integral for my life for that. And SJ, I know you've had men like that in your life as well, as we all have. And so very thankful for that, but thankful for the frontier man that you were for me, and that we all need those men like we're talking about.
Right. And if I had the stripes to be able to help you, I paid for those stripes in blood. So
Yeah.
I had been through it.
I know your betrayal. I know your story. And it can happen in ministry, in companies. It can happen in marriages. But I
Right.
know you had been through that. And that's, I think, what we're saying, that let's not waste our pain, but asking the kind of questions of God who can really bring clarity and direction and answers and help. Not even you partnering with somebody else to bring it to you. But I mean, I have had incredible experiences with God revealing to me what something was about that I just thought there's no way I would have figured that out.
Right.
With my daughters, in my marriage, with Zoweh, with our mission and ministry, all kinds of things like that. It's important to have good counsel in order to become oriented. Experiences and encounters. All right, come here. Let me tell you what that's about.
We simply were not meant to walk this alone.
Mhm.
We really do need each other. To get that advice in the company of men is so critical. But I love this idea of frontier life with what you've brought up, Greg, in the sense of our forefather in the faith, Abraham. When God comes to him, he says, hey, pick up everything you have
Right.
and go to a land I'll show you as we go. He's completely walking into the unknown. It's not so much a disorientation because he's getting oriented, but he doesn't quite know exactly where to go. And that this is the frontier life. This is the life with Jesus.
Right.
How are we oriented to movement in our life? What are we listening to? What are the signposts as we move forward in this life? And so this idea of walking with Jesus is a frontier life, without a doubt.
Well, and he had that impact on these guys, right? Like they knew where the synagogue was, but they also knew this guy is talking about something else. This guy's talking about something different.
Yes.
He goes and gets his brother, right? You got to hear this. I think I've found the Messiah. So there's enough orientation that there will be a Messiah someday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But not everybody was on board, and they got close to Jesus. And when they did, he gave them an orientation while he was with them, right? They're learning, called him teacher. He's telling them how the kingdom works, who they are in it.
Mm.
Gives a few of them some new names. I mean, identity, this whole pillar that we're talking about. And then he turns them loose with his power and authority. to go and be witnesses, to go and share what you have seen. And actually, I'm going to equip you to do what I've done, to do what I'm doing. And then you get the book of Acts and you see the church begin and you see really radical things happen. And I think, Greg, you're right. Somehow the frontier sounds more intriguing to me than the synagogue.
Yeah.
And I think it's inviting because I'm thinking about all of our listeners that are like, I am so lost right now. I don't know what orientation is. I can't even find the next blaze. I don't have a man like Jeff Andreessen in my life. You know, what do I do? What do I do?
Yeah, you look for those old guys who walk with a limp.
Yeah, I think that's number one. I think a couple of things that you guys have stirred up in me. The first thing I think about in that regard, what you brought up, Greg, is if we had 100 podcasts, we'd probably talk about it 100 times, that the enemy loves to use isolation against us.
Yeah.
And so if you're in that place where you are feeling disoriented, and maybe you were oriented at one time and you've lost the trail, like Greg said, the thing to realize is that the men around you don't know necessarily that that's true. Maybe it's obvious. Maybe you're going through a divorce and you lost your job and the dog ran off and your truck won't start. I mean, maybe you're living a country song right now. But the great thing about that, I heard one time, is that you just play it in reverse and they all come back. But really, it's it's not that simple.
No.
You may be going through a time in your life and it may be obvious that you're struggling that way, but I would argue that most men are struggling and most people don't know about it. They're struggling and the people around them are unaware of it. So the key then is to send up a signal flare. You've got to agree, okay, I'm sliding down the side of this mountain, or I am totally lost. I got to build a rescue fire. I got to send up a signal flare. I got to do something.
Make a call.
To get somebody's attention.
Send a text.
Walk up to the guy in church, walk up to the guy at work, walk up to the guy wherever you are, listeners, and say, can we get a cup of coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what that is? That's the beginning of intimacy.
Yes.
No doubt.
So
Friendship.
your orientation is going to be
no doubt.
often, so often, if not always, done in relationship. And then I would say, SJ, for our listeners, and Greg, we've shared this before, it's what Viper says to Maverick. Hey, and if they don't give you a reel when you get there, I'll fly with you.
Mhm.
So listeners, you know, email us.
Yeah, exploring more at Zoweh.org.
And we'll reach out. I want to take the last few minutes we have of this particular session and just talk about when the Christian life, when this larger orientation, do you remember when it started for you? When you went through the wardrobe? When you went down the rabbit hole, right, Neo? See how far it goes, red pill, blue pill.
You know, the Sunday school answer is it started when I got saved, right? And really, there's some truth to that.
There is.
Okay. As we've talked about, listeners, your citizenship in the kingdom, you got to start there, really.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's not in order.
There's no orientation without Jesus.
That's right.
Let's just make it clear.
That's
There
right.
is none.
So if your citizenship is not in order, again, email us, you know, or look out for that elder at the church or someone that you know and get that in order. But then I'll just say, for me, it started with an invitation. I was invited to what was at the time Top Gun weekend.
The Heart of a Warrior
it's
weekend.
now the Heart of a Warrior weekend, but it's our weekend encounter with God. And there were, at the time, I think it was probably more like 200, maybe 250 guys. Now it's like 400. I'd been a Christian for a few years, but I heard that weekend all of this terminology, and you and Tom and Jim Shanae and
Gary
Jay
Barklow.
Stott
Jay,
and Gary Barklow, to talking about some of this terminology. And you've heard me say this before. I didn't even know what the heck you were saying. I just wanted to hear more of it.
Yeah.
You know,
That's so
That's a
funny.
good
I
point.
think one of the subtitles ought to be 11 sessions and a lot of coffee.
yeah, yeah, it was.
24-hour
It was
coffee.
just took some of that. And it's more than a teaching session. And I think a lot of men know this, but there's a few pieces that are missing that you're a step away. And I think for all of us, for me, I know God came after me for orientation. I couldn't tell you why. Maybe I missed the bus in other times that he brought it by and stuck to my guns, you know, stuck to my system, stuck to my program of what it meant to be a Christian man until it just really didn't work so many times. You know, the formulas, the systems, the program.
Yeah, you were on wash, rinse, repeat.
I was repeating fourth
Over
grade.
and over and
I was
over.
repeating fourth grade and
Yeah.
expecting different results kind
Right.
of thing. And so that's when I remember hearing John Eldridge did a session called Epic, and it was about the larger story. And I was Dorothy. I went from black and white to color, and I wasn't in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I went, whoa, if this is true,
Yeah.
it changes everything. It actually led to our creation of the map, our version of the two realms and
Two
two
realms, two
kingdoms, which we've
kingdoms.
talked about on earlier podcasts. So, but that was huge beginnings for me. And I had been a Christian all my life.
Right.
Grew up in the church. And I just want to say that if that's you, you can be lost. I was
Mm-hmm.
disoriented. I think I had the equipment that I needed for my younger years, my younger faith. Just do this, do it.
Yeah.
Do it because God said so.
Discipline's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
I needed a graduation badly.
So what does it look like to begin to get oriented? Just a quick Bible lesson. So you have the Mount of Transfiguration, and all of a sudden Elijah, Moses, and Jesus are in all their glory. And of course, Peter is looking at this going, hey, this is great. Let's just build 3 tabernacles. And then we know what happens from there. But what's interesting about that is that it was the law came through Moses, and Elijah being the greatest Old Testament prophet. Peter's looking at this scene going, hey, all of these are really kind of equal because now we have Jesus. And so the Father then has to step in and go, no, listen to him. And I think we grow up learning the law, how to look both ways when we cross the street, how to obey our parents, how
so you can survive.
Just tell me what to do. As we're kids and as we're parents, we want to tell our kids what to do, and we want our kids to listen to what we tell them to do. And it's just the way we grow up, and then we look at our faith the same way. And I tell you, I can look at the Old Testament and I can look at the law and I can go, oh, it would be so good to live in that era because I could just do these things. But as I look through them, I realize, boy, I've actually broken a lot of these rules here, And so Jesus comes along and goes, okay, I'm going to fulfill this. But the point being that, hey, there's a new sheriff in town, and this new sheriff is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you oriented to the scriptures, to God? Is it really up to you? Or is there a willingness to go, no, actually, I need him. If it's going to happen, it's going to be because this man is living inside of me.
There's the company I keep.
And here's the company I keep, and I'm learning how to listen to him, how to listen to his voice. And that is actually the frontier life that you're talking about. I remember when I got on an airplane that had GPS, and there's certain mountainous approaches that we would have to shoot where we would have to deselect all ground-based equipment in order to simply go celestial. And so when we get down to that point in the checklist, the co-pilot will go, do you want me to deselect the ground-based equipment? I would say no. I've been using that stuff all my life. I do not want to disconnect that until it actually came to an approach where I had to deselect it. Because if I didn't deselect the ground-based equipment, it was going to get in the way. And that first time you hit the button and deselect all the Sunday school lessons and all the rights and wrongs, and you actually listen to the voice of God is a very frightening thing because you're taking a real risk to do that. But as soon as I went and deselected the ground-based equipment, I had 14 GPS satellites
available
giving me
right.
my position, and my position was within a hair's breadth, and it was far superior than the ground-based equipment
system.
that
you've always been
that I
using.
had always been used to listening to. And this is what it all boils down to, is helping you and providing that environment where you can listen to God.
Yeah. All right. So we're closing this one down. Landing gear, boom. And it's not a crash. We're going to talk about in the next sessions, identity, who you are, the landscape, where you are, and then the good that God's up to in your life, how he's growing you. What does it really look like to walk with him like you're talking about? And the first times that you're learning that actually is an invitation from disorientation, really from the boat onto the water, to walk on water with him and to be with him in the adventure it is of this kingdom life, Christian life. So listeners, hang with us. It's going to be an exciting couple of weeks, I think. I'm looking forward to talking about it, sharing and exploring it with my friends. So we'll be back next week with some more, exploring more.
Yeah. If you've got questions, comments, anything you need from us listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at exploringmore@zoweh.org. And if you would, on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, please give us a rate, a review. It helps other people to find us. And I just want to say, listeners, Serena and Brooke are our sound engineers and editors, and man, they make us sound good. We are very appreciative of their skills and their gifting. Thank you so much for what you do, Serena and Brooke.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll see you next week.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the life of more by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.